Hey guys, welcome back to Candid Cinema. I'm Amanda, otherwise known as AMX NDA Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. I ended up watching 3 movies this weekend, so I'm just going to do like a review roundup of what I watched this weekend. The first movie that I watched was The Tender Bar, directed by George Clooney. I know, he's back in the director's chair, and it was based off of a memoir by J.R. Mooringer. So we go back to the 1970s. There's this little kid, young J.R., who has to move into his grandfather's house because his mother, Lily Rabe, just couldn't hold everything together because little JR, played by Daniel Ranieri perfectly, such a great performance from him. He has an absent father, and his father actually is in broadcasting, and he hears his voice every single night on the radio, and that's the only connection that he has to him. So he does have an absent father. That ends up playing a key role in his identity and who he wants to become as a man. So we have little JR take a liking to his uncle Charlie, who is played by the wonderful Ben Affleck, and we see a budding connection between the two of them. So here's what I really enjoyed about The Tender Bar. The soundtrack was really great. The whole 70s vibe they really got. But for me, it's all about family connection. And it doesn't really matter if it's a parent, if it's an uncle, if it's a grandparent. Everyone's going to connect with a family member differently. And with me, Uncle Charlie kind of reminded me of my uncle and my connection with him because he's like 20 years older than me, and I've always considered him my brother. So it was just a really different connection. It's a unique connection. And what I really loved about Ben Affleck's Uncle Charlie is that apart from the fact that he is just incredibly charming on screen and off screen, he was treating JR as an adult. He didn't treat him like a kid, and he showed him the ropes. Plenty of life lessons about financial issues, about education, about working, just everything that a kid needs to know. And he taught him that early on. And I think that's what was so beautiful about The Tender Bar, is that they took that connection. They didn't really waste any time in showing how prominent of a figure Uncle Charlie was to little JR. So I really enjoyed that. The one thing that I didn't really like about The Tender Bar is the fact that they had 2 separate timelines and they were going forwards and backwards and they're trying to put everything together. So the only way that kind of works is if you match up the flash forwards or the flashbacks, however you want to call it, with whatever's happening in the present time on screen. They didn't really do that, and it kind of felt a bit jumbled. The voice that was used for the narrator was also very monotone, and it wasn't as engaging when we're trying to piece things together in the story. That was also something that was lacking. And also, George Clooney's direction was fine. It wasn't anything great. I was kind of expecting more with him in the director's chair coming back, but it is a very generic coming of age story. I did enjoy it for what it was. Heartwarming, little anecdotes, a lot of laughter. When it came to little JR going off to college and actually getting older and bonding with Uncle Charlie, it was Ty Sheridan's connection with Ben Affleck that really worked in the second half of this film. But also, the movie only worked with Ben Affleck on screen as Uncle Charlie because it was just a magnetic performance from him. There was such warmth, and he was his dad. And I love that they showed that it doesn't matter who is present in your life. They all play a vital role in who you become. And I think that was the takeaway. So I ended up giving The Tender Bar a 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and the link to my full review is below. So the next film that I watched actually came out last year on Netflix, and it is Maggie Gyllenhaal's directorial debut, The Lost Daughter. So we have Olivia Colman, Dakota Johnson, and the always lovely Jessie Buckley in this movie. Girl power, am I right? So Maggie Gyllenhaal presents a story of motherhood, of womanhood, and the effects of having a family and losing your individuality. I think it was a really strong character piece for Olivia Colman, who plays Lita. She goes away on vacation, and as she observes the beach with this massive family, she spots Dakota Johnson and her character Nina on the beach with her little girl, and that prompts these flashbacks to her being that young and taking care of her own daughters. So we get a glimpse of what life was like for young Lita, who was played brilliantly by Jessie Buckley. And we go back and see these like fragmented pieces of her memories, the good ones and the bad ones, mainly the more challenging aspects of being a mother, being a young mother, you know, with her career and just trying to work through it and balancing everything. So you have the entire spectrum of motherhood. But I think the important aspect of The Lost Daughter is how complex and layered women are when it comes to making decisions and what they should do and what they are conditioned to do in that case. And what Maggie Gyllenhaal presents in this is that the sense of losing yourself when having children, when trying to build a family, when you haven't achieved things that you've wanted for a really long time. So Lita, as a professor, she wanted to constantly grow and move forward, and she felt like her children kind of held her back in a way, not in a bad way. It's all about timing at the end of the day. She sees that Dakota Johnson's Nina is, you know, frustrated with her daughter. It's a similar type of vibe that like she just wants to live her life and her kid is there. And it's a constant battle within herself. And I think that Gyllenhaal showed that extremely well. For me, it overstayed its welcome. I think that the pacing of this film is the issue, the real issue. And I think that it could have been cut down a bit. I wish that we could have gotten more of Jessie Buckley, who really brought the character of Lita together. So we have Olivia Colman, obviously, she's a great performer, but this movie and Lita's character doesn't work without Jessie Buckley's flashbacks as young Lita to make a well-rounded character in Lita and show like her mental health depleting and having anxiety and struggling with who she is. So I think that Jessie Buckley is the standout in this film. I also really love the way that Gyllenhaal framed Dakota Johnson and Olivia Colman when they were talking to each other, because there's this thing with women that only a woman through a female lens could really capture. This is the acknowledgement and understanding between other women when making eye contact. And I think that Gyllenhaal did that extremely well, because every single time that the frame was on Dakota Johnson while Olivia Colman was talking about her own experience as a mother and as a wife and raising her children, it just stayed on Dakota Johnson. And then Dakota also gave a great performance, because I felt that she was really connecting with Olivia Colman without saying anything. So I think that those scenes in particular between Dakota and Olivia, I think that that is what made this film work. And I wanted more of that, because Gyllenhaal created such great tension between the two of them. And I just feel like it was lacking when they weren't on screen together and building that to that final confrontation of, you know, what had happened to her children, what she had done with her children, how she raised them, having that link to each other. I feel like that conversation would have been a bit more powerful and made an impact if we had more scenes of them just talking about who they are as an individual and then as a mother. So I think that would have worked out a bit better. Or else I personally think it was a strong debut from Gyllenhaal. I did give The Lost Daughter a 2 out of 5, just because the pacing is crucial when it comes to character pieces and it could have been cut down. I really wanted to enjoy it, but this had potential to be a really strong story and a really good movie if certain things were changed around and the structure of the story was changed a bit, just to complement both Olivia Colman and Dakota Johnson, whereas like Jessie Buckley really just stole the movie away from them, because the flashbacks were a bit more interesting in order to actually connect with Lita. So yeah, I gave it a 2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. It's still worth a watch just for these performances, and if you love Maggie Gyllenhaal. The last film I watched is actually coming out on January 14th on Apple TV Plus. That is The Tragedy of Macbeth. directed by Joel Cohen from A24. You have Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand in this movie as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Now, for me, Shakespeare is definitely not for everybody. Like 100% it isn't for everybody. Macbeth isn't my favorite Shakespeare play. I prefer King Lear. That's just the way I am. So what director Joel Cohen did, what cinematographer Bruno de Bonnel did to create the tragedy of Macbeth is that they took these stage directions and the internal thoughts of these characters and presented it through the visual storyline, the imagery on screen. I thought was extremely well done. The lighting, the silhouettes, the shadowing, just all of that in black and white really presented a different story for Macbeth, which I appreciated because even though this version of Macbeth is literally by the book, it's by the book. And I think that was the issue for me, that it did drag on a little bit. And it could have been cut down or changed in a certain way, but this was really by the book. The production design by Stefan Deschamps was really strong as well. So you have those three aspects. You have the direction, cinematography, and the production design that really stood out. And it's like a visual feast for people who are studying film, to be perfectly honest. So anyone who loves Shakespeare and anyone who's studying film, this is a visual treat. But I understand that it's Shakespeare and you really have to pay attention to what they're saying. I personally thought that Denzel Washington had the strongest performance in the entire film. I just wanted to see McDormand a bit more and see what she could have done with Lady Macbeth, but I think that it wasn't really much. But Denzel Washington, you could feel everything in his Macbeth, everything that he was thinking, the line delivery, the emotional connection to these lines, he really delivered. And it is one of the best performances of last year, because technically this did come out for Oscar season and it is coming out now on Apple TV Plus. And it was in theaters, couldn't go last year in December, but it was in theaters. So it is qualified for this award season. So Denzel Washington was really strong. I just don't think as a whole that this picture delivered on all fronts. I felt like you just really have to love Shakespeare to love this particular film. I enjoy Shakespeare, don't get me wrong. Like I said before, Macbeth isn't my favorite. It did drag on. I could really feel the runtime in the last 30 minutes and I wanted them to wrap it up. I just felt like the tight-knit frame was really different. I thought the camera work was different. And like I said, it felt almost intrusive, like they were exposed on screen. And I really liked that it was different for Macbeth and for Lady Macbeth to kind of get a feel of who they are. I thought it was a good character work for both of them, but the film as a whole just really didn't do anything much for me. And I can't forget to mention Catherine Hunter, who played the trio of witches. Probably one of the best scenes that I have seen for Shakespeare on screen because of how obscure it was. And I think the aspect of, having it in black and white and having a great score, very different. And just the line delivery from Catherine Hunter was really interesting. And I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She was really strong. And it was a great choice to have one prominent figure play one of the witches and then kind of use her powers to bring out the trio of witches. But yeah, for me, I gave Tragedy of Macbeth a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Again, my review for The Tender Bar, The Lost Daughter, and The Tragedy of Macbeth will be in the bio here. So those are the 3 films that I watched this weekend. I'll probably do more of these roundups because there's so much coming out. You guys can always follow me over at AMX NDA Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Let me know which of these films you watched, what you liked, what you didn't like. If you think Denzel Washington's going to get nominated for an Oscar, let me know. I'll catch you guys next time. Keep watching movies.